I'd been doing late-night shopping at the same store for months. With my work schedule, it was just easier that way. I'd leave my 8-year-old son at home with my mom and swing by Walmart to grab the essentials for the week. Every time I went, there was this friendly employee who always offered to help me carry the bags to my car. He must have been in his 30s, kind of shy, really polite, and seemed like the type who never bothered anyone. We didn't talk much, just a good evening here, a thanks there. I never paid much attention to him, mostly because he always seemed more focused on not being noticed than anything else. But that night, something was different. As soon as I finished at the register and he came over to grab the bags, he started talking more casually. At first, it was just small talk about the weather. Nothing unusual. But then he started making personal comments, things I'd never mentioned to anyone. He said something like, "Must be tough doing all this shopping alone every night." Huh? That threw me off because I'd never said I came alone, and I didn't remember talking to anyone about my routine. That's when my internal alarm went off. I kept a neutral face, but something about it was unsettling. As he carried the bags, he kept talking, now bringing up my home, which made my skin crawl. He said something like, "You're lucky to live in such a quiet neighborhood." That made me freeze for a second. I had no idea how he knew where I lived since I'd never mentioned it. We had no mutual friends, and as far as I knew, he only saw me there, at Walmart. I forced a smile and mumbled something like, "Yeah, I guess so," but my mind was racing. Was he following me after my shopping trips? Or maybe asking people about me? My stomach churned. But the worst part came when we got to my car. He put the last bags in the trunk, turned around, and without any warning, spoke softly, almost like a whisper. "That back window of yours could use a new lock?" I froze, my mind trying to process what he'd just said, and all I could think was how impossible it was for him to know that. That window, which faced the backyard, did have a loose lock, but only I knew that. He gave a small smile, like he was sharing some secret, and walked away slowly, saying, "Good night." As he left, I just stood there by my car, hands trembling, my heart racing. I tried to convince myself it was just a weird coincidence, that maybe he was joking, but every fiber of my being told me otherwise. I got into my car, locked the doors immediately, and looked around the parking lot, still trying to think straight. That's when I saw something that chilled me to the core. He was standing across the parking lot, watching me. That same strange smile, like he was waiting for something, just staring. I started the car quickly and got out of there. I looked in the rearview mirror, and thankfully, I didn't see any car following me. Still, I couldn't relax. As I drove, my mind kept going back to those words about the back window. The thought that he'd already been by my place, that he knew more about my life than he should, filled me with a horrible feeling. All I could think about was my son at home, and how this could be more serious than it seemed. When I got home, I tried to act normal, not wanting to scare my mom or my son, but inside, I was in full-blown panic mode. I went straight to the back room to check that window. The lock was just as loose as I remembered, and the worst part was that it was visible from outside if anyone got close enough. That's when I started thinking about all those times I felt like I was being watched or heard tiny noises outside at night. Had he been there before? Just the thought of it sent a chill down my spine. That night, I barely got any sleep. I shoved furniture against the doors and kept every outside light on. Every little noise made my heart race. My mom and my son were asleep, but I couldn't close my eyes. I kept wondering how I should handle this. Report it to Walmart? Go to the police? But what would I even say? All he'd done was make some weird comments. Nothing that could actually be considered criminal. Even so, I knew something wasn't right, and I needed to do something before this got out of hand. The next day, I went to Walmart, still unsure of what exactly I was going to do. I felt a knot in my stomach as I walked in, but luckily, I didn't see that employee around. I decided to talk to the manager, trying to explain calmly what had happened without sounding like I was overreacting. I mentioned the strange comments, him knowing about my back window, but I could tell the manager was pretty skeptical. He said he'd keep an eye on things and that I could file a formal complaint if I wanted to, but he didn't seem to take it very seriously. I left Walmart even more frustrated, unsure if that was going to help at all. Over the next week, I avoided doing any late-night shopping, and I asked my mom to keep an eye out for anything unusual around the house. But still, every time it got dark, I felt like someone was watching me, like someone was close by. I started noticing little things I hadn't before, like the backyard gate slightly out of place or footprints in the dirt near the back window. I kept telling myself it was just paranoia, but at the same time, I knew deep down that something wasn't right. One night, while I was tidying up in the kitchen, I heard a sound coming from the backyard. It was like the rustling of leaves, as if someone was moving close to the windows. My heart raced, but I tried to stay calm, thinking it could just be a cat or some other animal. I walked over to the living room and peeked through the curtain, trying to see into the dark. To my relief, there was no one out there, or at least, no one that I could see. But still, the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I went back inside and double-checked every door and window, locking everything again. When I finally turned off the lights to try and sleep, a quiet panic took over me. I knew something was wrong, but I had no proof. That night, I only fell asleep in the early hours of the morning, and even the slightest noise had me waking up in a panic, scared that someone might come in at any moment. The next day, I decided to take action and put a stronger lock on that back window. I bought the sturdiest lock I could find and spent most of the morning installing it. I tried to act like it was just an extra security measure, but the truth was, I was terrified. The thought that someone, maybe that Walmart employee, had been close enough to my house to notice every detail was a thought I couldn't shake. Every small sound in the house put me on edge, like something was about to happen. After that, things were strangely calm. For a few weeks, I didn't see that employee at Walmart, and I started thinking he might have been transferred or even fired. The fear started to fade, and life went back to some sort of normal. But then, early one morning, I found a crumpled note stuffed in the fence of my backyard. It was just a scrap of paper, but there was one single line written on it. "I'm glad you fixed the window." The last thing I expected was to lose sight of my daughter. I had just taken her to Walmart to grab a few quick things, nothing complicated, just the basics. She was right next to me at the checkout, holding onto a pack of gum she'd picked out, and I got distracted for just a second, digging through my wallet for my card. It was literally just a few seconds, but when I looked over, she wasn't there anymore. My heart skipped a beat, and this cold feeling took over. At first, I didn't think it was serious, you know? I thought maybe she wandered off to look at a toy or something. But the longer I looked around, the more wrong it all started to feel. I started calling her name, that kind of panicked voice you get when you're trying to sound calm but are freaking out inside. I called her over and over, my heart racing with every second that passed. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I spotted a guy near the exit, holding her hand. He was walking fast, pulling her along like he was in a hurry, but he tried to make it look casual, like it was totally normal. But I knew right away something was off. My panic turned into full-on desperation, and without even thinking, I rushed over to him as fast as I could. When I got close, I shouted my daughter's name. The guy stopped and looked at me, surprised. He slowly let go of her hand and just stared at me, looking almost offended. "Hey, take it easy, man," he said, with this weird smile on his face. I was just helping. She looked lost, so I thought I'd take her to buy a toy. The way he said it, so casually, made me even more suspicious. Who does that? Who just grabs a lost kid and starts walking out with them without telling anyone? I picked up my daughter right away, and she clung to me, looking scared. She definitely didn't know him at all. I kept my eyes on him, trying to figure out what his deal was. He kept up this relaxed act, but his eyes kept darting around like he was hiding something. Everything in me was screaming that something was wrong. Before I could even ask more, he took a step back and said he had to go, turning toward the exit. I wanted to stop him, but I didn't want to make a scene either. So I decided to follow him, holding my daughter close, my stomach in knots, watching his every move. I started following him, trying not to be too obvious, but he seemed to know I was right behind him. He kept glancing back, which only made me more alert. With every step he took toward the exit, I felt my adrenaline spike. It was like he was trying to escape without making it obvious. He ducked into an aisle near the exit, like he was hoping to shake me off, and for a second, I lost sight of him. When I got to the end of the aisle, he was gone. I looked around everywhere, but it was like he'd vanished into thin air. The relief I felt having my daughter safe in my arms mixed with this uneasiness that wouldn't go away. How does someone just disappear like that, in the middle of a store? I looked around, hoping to catch a glimpse of him, but he was nowhere to be seen. I thought about telling a security guard, but at the same time, I kept second-guessing myself, wondering if he really meant any harm. But no matter how much I tried to reason it out, I couldn't shake the image of him holding her hand and heading straight for the exit. I went straight to the nearest security guard and quickly explained what had happened. He listened, but he didn't seem to take it as seriously as I had hoped. He said they had cameras in the store and could check, but I could tell he thought it was probably just some misunderstanding. Still, I insisted, describing the guy as best as I could remember. The weird smile, his clothes, everything. That image of him holding my daughter's hand was burned into my mind, like a warning. While waiting for the security guy to check, I stayed close, holding my daughter and trying to calm both of us down. I kept glancing around, half expecting the guy to pop up out of nowhere again. When the guard came back, he told me they did see the man on camera, but he disappeared just after leaving the building, like he knew exactly where to go to avoid being seen outside. He said he'd alert other stores around, but it felt like he didn't think it was that big of a deal. I left Walmart with my daughter held tight against me, still feeling that uneasy knot in my chest. She was quiet, a little shaken, but she wasn't crying. I, on the other hand, was stuck in this weird mix of relief and anxiety. I couldn't stop thinking about what might have happened. How can a stranger just grab a kid and act like it's no big deal? My mind kept replaying that moment, and I started wondering if he'd been watching us longer than I realized. Did he wait for that perfect moment, knowing I'd be distracted? When I got home and put my daughter down to rest, the feeling didn't go away. I found myself looking out the window several times, as if I was expecting to see him on the street. The whole thing felt surreal, but it was real enough to mess with my head. I kept running through what happened, trying to make sense of it all, but no matter how much I thought about it, I couldn't shake the feeling that something bad had almost happened. The fact that I still didn't have any answers is what makes it all feel so wrong. Even now, I wonder what that guy's real intentions were. It's been a while since then, but I still find myself looking over my shoulder whenever I'm out in public with my daughter, like that guy could just show up again anytime. I realized how safe we feel in crowded places, thinking nothing bad could happen in broad daylight, with people around. But that day taught me that it only takes a second of looking away for something terrifying to go down. Now, I keep her close to me, within reach, and I don't take my eyes off her, not even for a second. That experience left me with this constant feeling of having to stay alert, like I can't ever relax again. I think about how many other parents have probably been through the same thing, feeling that same helplessness. And the strangest part of it all is that the guy was never seen again, like he just vanished that day, leaving me with this feeling that I can never shake off. I was working my night shift at Walmart, doing the usual end-of-shift stuff like checking shelves, picking up items left out of place, the routine. The store was officially closed, and only a few co-workers were around, wrapping things up too. While I was fixing up a shelf in the back aisle, I noticed something strange. There was a guy just standing there, crouched down between the aisles, staring at some cans of soup. At first, I thought maybe he was a lost customer, but then it hit me. The store had been closed for a while. He shouldn't have been there. Feeling a bit responsible, I decided to go up to him. As I got closer, I couldn't help but notice how awkward he looked. When he saw me, he quickly looked away, like he was super interested in the soup label or something. I just told him, straight up, that the store was closed and he needed to leave. Then he hit me with a reply that threw me off. "This is the only time I have to shop. Can you give me a few more minutes?" The way he said it, calm but kind of pushy, made the hairs on my neck stand up. I knew something was off. What he said made no sense. Who would be desperate enough to buy a can of soup after midnight? But the way he looked at me, half begging and half challenging, made me hesitate. I decided to let one of my coworkers know what was going on, and we both kept an eye on him while he kept pretending to look at products. He was getting more nervous, just touching things on the shelf without really looking. The whole vibe was off, and I started to question if he was even there to buy anything. A few minutes later, 2 more coworkers joined us, catching on that something was weird. One of them suggested we call the cops, and honestly, I couldn't think of a better idea. We all had this gut feeling that he might be armed or something because he was just acting way too strange. The second the sirens started echoing outside, he looked at us, freaked out, and bolted toward the back of the store. It all happened so fast, but it left a sick feeling in my stomach. After he vanished, we found a backpack he'd left behind, just sitting there on the floor. I was still trying to process everything when one of my coworkers went over to the backpack to see what was inside. He opened it carefully, and to our shock, there was a gun, a rope, and rolls of duct tape in there. My heart was pounding. It felt like each item in that bag screamed that he wasn't there to do any shopping, not even close. Suddenly, the whole situation became terrifyingly real. If the cops hadn't shown up when they did, I can't even imagine what might have happened. It was chilling to think that instead of dealing with just a weird customer, we'd been face to face with someone who had some serious bad intentions. When the police came in and saw what we found, they started asking a ton of questions. They wanted to know how he got in, how long he'd been there, if any of us noticed anything strange before. But honestly, none of us had any real answers. It was like the guy appeared out of nowhere and managed to slip under the radar until that strange moment in the aisle. As I explained what happened, I realized my hands were shaking. I'd never been through anything like this at work before, and all I wanted was for it to be over. The police searched every inch of the store, but the guy was long gone. The mood among us employees was heavy. We just stood around in silence for a bit, trying to wrap our heads around what could have gone down. I couldn't stop replaying him hiding in that aisle and that weird excuse about only having that time to shop. It was like reality was sinking in slowly. He'd come there with a purpose, and it sure wasn't to pick up groceries. The cops said we did the right thing by calling them, but honestly, that only made the whole thing feel scarier. They suggested we up the security during night shifts, but that didn't ease the tension. When everything finally wrapped up, I walked out of the store feeling totally shaken. I couldn't stop thinking about the stuff he left in that bag and what he might have done if he hadn't been interrupted. I'd always thought of night shifts as boring, just stocking shelves and organizing. But after that night, I realized how vulnerable we really are in there. On my way home, I kept wondering if I even wanted to keep this job. It's hard to deal with the fact that something like this could happen at any moment to anyone. When I got home, my mind was still racing, and the adrenaline just wouldn't let up. I kept replaying everything over and over, trying to figure out if I missed any signs that could have shown just how dangerous he was. But the worst part was this feeling in my chest, a mix of fear and helplessness. It was terrifying to think he could have hurt any one of us, all while we were just trying to finish up a regular night at work. That night shift, which I always thought of as easy, had suddenly turned into a nightmare. In the days that followed, I couldn't focus at work. Every time I stepped into Walmart, I'd feel a chill go down my spine. I started paying extra attention to the security cameras, looking at the corners of the store, making sure no one was hiding. Even the sound of the automatic doors made me jump. The backpack and everything in it haunted me, like they were a reminder of just how close we'd come to something truly horrible. Even now, I haven't been able to shake it off. The whole vibe of the place changed for me. Anytime I see someone acting even slightly off, I get tense and my heart starts racing. I keep wondering if staying at this job is really worth it, if the paycheck is enough to risk going through something like that again. I still don't know what he planned to do that night, but the things he left behind are enough to keep me up at night. It's like every little item in that bag holds a piece of a nightmare I can't forget. Some of my coworkers tell me I should just get over it and move on, but that night showed me a side of the night shift I never expected. It's weird, but I always thought Walmart was a safe, predictable place where the biggest problem was a messy shelf. Now, every time I walk into that store, I can't shake the feeling that something bad could happen at any moment. And the worst part? Nobody else seems to get it. To them, it was just a weird night. To me, it was the day I realized how vulnerable we all are. I went back to Walmart that night, well after the rush hour, to exchange an item I'd bought by mistake. I figured I'd park around the back, where it's usually empty, so I could just get in and out quickly without having to look for a spot. Since the lot was practically deserted, I picked a space near one of the lights, just in case, it's kind of dim back there. As soon as I got out of the car, I noticed another vehicle parked a few spots away, headlights off. It felt a little odd because, at that hour, no one really parks in that area. But I just brushed it off and headed inside, more focused on getting the exchange done than anything else. Inside Walmart, everything went smoothly. The place was almost empty, just a few employees stocking shelves and a couple of customers wandering around. I finished the exchange, grabbed the right item, and started heading back out to my car without giving it much thought. But as soon as I got to the exit and looked over at the lot, I noticed that same car was now parked even closer to mine. Worse, the driver's side door was slightly open, like someone had either just gotten out or was sitting there waiting. I felt this weird sense of unease, like one of those moments when you just know something's off, even if you can't quite put your finger on it. Still, I tried to shrug it off as just a coincidence and kept walking. As I got closer to my car, that uncomfortable feeling of being watched just wouldn't go away. I kept glancing over at the strange car, half expecting someone to step out or turn on the engine and drive off, but nothing happened. The door stayed slightly open, and I couldn't see anyone inside. My pace picked up almost on instinct, that kind of urgency you feel when you sense something's not right. When I was almost at my car, I heard a faint click, like a door shutting. I looked over, and sure enough, the driver's door was now fully closed. A chill ran through me, as if someone knew the exact moment I'd turn around to check. I didn't waste any time. I hit the button to unlock my car and got in as quickly as possible, locking the doors the second I was inside. I sat there for a moment, trying to calm down and tell myself I was just overreacting. But before I could even catch my breath, I saw in my rearview mirror that the strange car had turned its headlights on and was slowly moving toward me. My heart was pounding. I started the car and prepared to get out of there fast. I fumbled with the seatbelt while looking around, plotting the quickest way out. All I wanted was to get out of that empty lot as quickly as possible. As soon as I pulled out of the parking spot, the strange car sped up too, staying close behind me. It wasn't like they were just trying to leave. They seemed to be following me on purpose, matching my every move. The emptiness of the lot made it all feel even more intense. There was no one else around, no other cars, no security in sight. My only option was to keep driving and try to get out of there fast. I took a sharp right turn, heading down a lane that led straight to the exit, hoping I could lose them. But they turned right along with me, not even a moment's hesitation. Every turn I made, the car was right there, following. I decided to try something out of desperation. I took a sharp turn down another aisle, making a full circle just to see if they'd copy me. And sure enough, when I looked in my rear view, they were doing the same thing, mirroring every move. By now, I was sweating and could feel my heart racing. I finally reached the exit, hoping that once I hit the street, they'd back off or go a different way. But the moment I left the lot, they stayed right on my tail. I pulled onto the main road, trying to speed up, but there were streetlights and a few speed bumps, forcing me to slow down. I could feel their headlights practically pressed up behind me, keeping a steady distance that was just close enough to be menacing, but not enough to draw attention. I glanced quickly in my rear view and could just make out a shadow in the driver's seat, but the windows were too dark to see any details. Panic was setting in hard, every second feeling like an hour, and I was starting to think they were waiting for just the right moment to do something. In a desperate move, I turned down a side street, one that I knew well and had a bunch of different exits. My plan was to lose them or, at the very least, find a spot where there'd be other people around. But to my horror, they stayed right behind, sticking to me like glue. The silence inside my car was suffocating, broken only by the hum of the engine and the sound of my tires on the road, every sound amplifying the fear building up inside me. I looked around, hoping to spot anyone, any open store, but this part of the street was deserted. As I kept driving down the narrow street, it felt like there was no choice but to keep going and hope I'd find a way out or somewhere safe to pull over. I made another quick turn, almost losing control of the wheel. When I looked in the mirror, the car was right there again, this time even closer. I was losing any sense of safety by the second. My mind started racing with worst-case scenarios. Maybe they were armed. Maybe they'd try to run me off the road. The fear was taking over, and I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears, each beat like a warning. Then, up ahead, I saw a small park with a couple of streetlights and what looked like two people sitting on a bench. Without thinking twice, I decided that was my chance. I pulled over fast, practically jumping the curb, and scrambled out of the car, shouting for help as I ran toward the couple. We all turned to look at the car together. At that moment, the headlights went off, plunging everything into darkness. We stood there in silence, watching, waiting for something to happen. The car just sat there, still, with no one getting out. It was like a shadow, just lurking. After what felt like forever, the car started to reverse, moving slowly away, almost like they decided they were done. I stood there, catching my breath, my body shaking, as I watched it make a slow, careful turn and drive off down the opposite street until it disappeared. Even when it was gone, the feeling of being watched lingered. It was like they left a mark somehow, an impression that wouldn't fade. The couple looked at me, still confused and maybe a little freaked out by my panic. To this day, I have no idea who was in that car or what they wanted. All I know is that feeling, that creeping fear of being hunted, the way every move felt calculated. I think about it sometimes, and I can still feel the way my skin crawled that night. It was like they were trying to send a message, and for some reason, they picked me. I just hope I never have to feel that kind of fear again.